Welcome to Plowman's Backyard, Ruby Homestead in Canada. Today we are attempting to make real Canadian maple syrup. As things slow down around the homestead, gardening is not on the agenda. We're not starting our chickens yet, but it is a great time in the spring to start harvesting some of that maple sap. We've tried over the years making maple syrup a few times and have not had great success. But this year I spent some time researching, spent some time with other people who've been making maple syrup successfully, and went to a maple sugar shack and learned from a guy who makes it to sell. So we today are going to be making maple syrup on a small scale in our own backyard. We actually got this idea of using these big 18-liter water jugs with the tap and line from a good friend of ours, Pam, over at Hidden Blessings Homestead. This year we just tapped these 2 trees in our front yard. We do have other maples in the bush that we can tap possibly next year, but this year we wanted to do it on a small scale and just see if we could actually go ahead and make maple syrup on our own. In the previous years I've attempted to do this and made maple candy. Also, in my first attempt this year I ended up making more of like a honey consistency of maple syrup, which still tasted really good. But I wanted to perfect it by the end of the season. I'm just going to take you through some of the trials and errors on making maple syrup in your own backyard on a small scale. So we started off, my husband just tapping the trees and getting the lines in place, and we just collected over the days using these 18 liters water bottles, just collecting the sap daily. We ended up only doing about maybe 2 weeks of collecting the sap and boiling it down, and we ended up collecting about 80 liters of maple syrup. Now that is a really small scale, and we could have done a lot more, like I said, if we had tapped the other maple trees in our bush. But we just wanted to get the experience. We wanted to perfect the experience in making maple syrup before we did it on a larger scale. And we also have a few things that we need to work on to build up to be able to do that, where it's going to be more cost effective. So from tapping the trees, we were very excited. It's amazing how just going out and tapping a tree and just seeing the first few drips coming out of the maple tree just brought so much joy. It was such an exciting experience. As the temperatures are perfect for making maple syrup, we thought it was a great time to do it. So if you live in Canada or anywhere that has maple trees, this is something you may want to try. Even though things might not turn out, it's worth the attempt. Basically, we have come to find out over the days of, evaporating the sap down into syrup that this truly is liquid gold. The first thing we were told when we were tapping our trees is that you don't want to tap in the same spot as the previous year. So we have tapped these 2 maple trees before in previous years, and we were told to do about make sure that we're about 6 inches away from the hole, and you also want to make sure that you're tapping on the south side. So basically the trees that get the most sunlight are going to flow the best because they're going to warm up a lot quicker than some of the other trees in the bush, which is why these 2 trees were doing excellent at flowing. When I was talking to the gentleman, when I went and spent the day with him and learned how to make maple syrup, I basically went, Hannah and I, and we spent the day at his sugar bush and got the experience. So we felt pretty confident and managed to do our first true batches of maple syrup. When you're putting the spiles into the maple tree, you also want to make sure that you're putting it on an angle to make sure that you have good flow of the maple sap. We were quite proud of our setup and how everything worked out. This setup made it quite simple to go and collect the sap, as we had a few extra of these 18-liter jugs around that we could bring in. So every day I think we were bringing in about 2 of these big jugs to boil down. I did collect a couple days in a row where we ended up with 4 to 5 jugs that I boiled down in one day or evaporated in one day. And basically you want to make sure that if you're collecting the sap and you're not doing it right away, that it needs to be kept cold. Now thankfully the temperature outside was really good, so I didn't have to worry about that. So the longest part and the hardest part probably of making the maple syrup is the evaporating time. So you're basically wanting to evaporate all of the water out of the sap and leave the sugar. So you need about 40 liters of sap to make 1 liter of maple syrup. So it's a lot of evaporating. So the best setup you can do, I highly recommend, if you can do it outside with wood, is probably better, or a lot of people do it on like a propane burner. We didn't have access to necessarily having propane at the time, so I did the first boil I did in the house, which raises a lot lot of steam in the house. So if you basically can have the windows open, the fans going, it does help. It wasn't too bad. The beginning stages of the boil or the evaporating isn't so bad, but when you get closer and closer to the syrup, there is a lot more moisture coming out into the air. We did also have another setup where we used our barbecue, the propane barbecue. It did work okay, but it didn't go down as fast as I was doing it in the house. And it's just because it wasn't getting steady heat like it was on the burners on the stove in the house. A lot of that could have been due to the fact that I had to have the lid of the barbecue open. Another thing you really want to do is make sure you're filtering it. I filtered the first time using the cheesecloth, and I do not recommend that. It doesn't filter anything but the little debris and the bark or dirt or bugs or anything that might be in your sap. It's really good for that, but you definitely want to have the proper filtration system, which is a big kind of felt filter that is made specifically for maple syrup. And then you have the pre-filters, and having a few of those into the felt filter, it really does cut down on that sugar sand that you're going to find that's going to make your sap cloudy. That being said, I would still recommend doing that more than once, because ours didn't come out super clear, but it definitely is better than not having anything. And you still might not get all the sugar sand out of your syrup, but if you let your syrup sit for a while, you'll see that the sand will collect at the bottom, and then you just use your syrup and allow that sand to sit there and just throw it away when you're done. One of the biggest challenges I found with syrup is, how do you know when it's ready? One thing that I learned from this guy when I went and was learning how to do maple syrup from him was that he taught me that you figure out the boiling temperature in your own home first. They tell you and teach you in school that 212 degrees Fahrenheit is the boiling temperature of water. Now that varies on, the atmosphere around you, your elevation, a lot of things. Just like canning, every home is different. So he taught me that the first thing you want to do when you're boiling your sap is to make sure that you find your own boiling temperature of water. So he gave me this thermometer. It's a maple syrup thermometer, one that I can collaborate. So I have to set it each time I do a boil, where I can find the boiling temperature, and you set this thermometer into like rapid boiling water, collaborate it to 0 so that you know that 0 is your starting point for your boiling of your maple syrup. And then you go ahead and you put the thermometer into the finishing product of your maple syrup, and make sure that you go 7 degrees above that where you have collaborated that 0 point of boiling water. So we've used this twice now, and I didn't find it super helpful. I'm not sure that it worked properly, or maybe that I wasn't using it properly. This is probably the most stressful part, I think, of doing the syrup, is knowing when it's done. So like I said in the past, I have actually boiled it to the point where I've made hard candy, which isn't a bad thing. And I know a lot of people right now are making maple sugar, where it's basically you're boiling all of the water out. So if you do go over, those are other options that you can do, but we want it to make pure maple syrup. There's a lot of people that say that you cannot use like a meat thermometer, like a digital thermometer. And then there's a lot of people that also say that you should not be using a candy thermometer. And people recommend like a hygrometer. I didn't have a hygrometer, so I ended up using this maple syrup thermometer that this man gave me. Plus I had a candy thermometer. Plus I had a digital thermometer, which is like a meat thermometer. Anyways, I'm using all 3 of these thermometers. I set the thermometer to about 217 so that I knew that it was getting close to being done, because once it's getting close, you really can't leave that boil. You cannot let the boil go down. You have to keep it boiling, and it'll spike really quickly. And even though it might take a long time from, say your syrup going from 210 to 217, sometimes that next couple degrees goes super fast, and you might just go over too much. So I got it at about 217, and I did not take my eyes off it. I was watching the syrup, I was watching the bubbles, and basically you want to see a lot of tiny little bubbles. You won't see as much of the condensation or the steam. It kind of subsides a little bit, the syrup gets a bit thicker, and you're going to see a little bit of rise in the bubbles. Also, I ended up shutting this syrup off at about 219. I also did the spoon method where you're seeing if the syrup falls off to the spoon, kind of like curtains and stuff. I haven't had great success with that in the past, but because I had these other 3 thermometers going and then I did the spoon method, I ended up seeing how the curtain kind of felt, and it felt thick. So I removed it at 215 and we ended up straining it in the proper felt strainer. Plus I had 3 pre-filters on there just to strain out all of that sugar sand and any other little things that might be floating in there before we end up bottling it. So once we ended up straining it, and it does take a little bit of time because it is a thicker consistency, and once you've got all that strained out, oh boy, it looks beautiful and it tastes delicious. So once all the filtering and stuff was done, I know that it did take some time, so the temperature of the syrup had cooled off. I then went and put it on our stove, and I just brought it up to about 180. So I think what I was told by the man at the Sugar Shack, he said you can bottle it anywhere from about 160 to 180, sometimes 140, but he suggests a little bit higher. So I bottled it about 180 and it seemed to do really well. It sealed properly. There is a little bit of a cloudiness to it, a very little bit of sugar sand when left sitting overnight, but I can tell you the consistency was great. The next day we had made breakfast and we had some syrup. My husband loved it. It was a little on the lighter side, not quite too thick, but we were really happy that we had successfully made maple syrup instead of maple candy. So if this is an adventure that you want to try out for next season, do your research and know that, you may not get it perfect the first time you try it, but keep trying because the rewards pay off greatly. It is so sweet. We were super happy that we finally made our own true, real Canadian maple syrup.